Om Agyantimidandasya Jnananjanachalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatyate Sadharine Vanshakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Deve Pranamami Hari Priye Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. It is truly an honor to be with all of you this evening. My sincere gratitude to Shriman Harivalasji, Kalyan Ramanji, and to all those who have helped to organize this event, and especially to each and every one of you for so kindly being with us this evening. I was asked to speak something about the book that I have written entitled The Journey Home, and also the subject Yoga of the Heart. Some years ago, I was sitting minding my own business in the New Delhi airport, just waiting for my flight, which was expectedly delayed. A lady came up to me and said the Union Minister for the Environment and the Ecology for all of India was sitting close by, and she wanted to speak to me. After a very cordial exchange of welcomes, she launched into a serious challenge. She said, "What are you yogis and swamis and sadhus doing about the environment?" The rivers are being polluted so much that they are literally poisonous, and tens and millions of people are drinking and bathing in that water every day. Fish are dying in the oceans. The air is polluted. There's massive amounts of toxic waste being put into the earth, and you're sitting in your ashrams and in your forests meditating and praying and chanting your mantras. What are you doing for the ecology? I was hoping they would call me for my flight, but they didn't. And suddenly people started gathering around to hear, what is the sadhu going to do in this situation? I replied, if a person has boils on their body due to a disease in the blood, then yes, you have to deal with the symptoms. But at the same time, if you don't find the root cause, the boils are going to recur again and again and again. Similarly, the pollution of the environment today, we have to deal with the symptoms, and that you're doing, trying to clean the rivers and so forth. But what is the root cause of it? It is pollution in the ecology of the human heart. Toxic greed is what's causing people to pollute the world. Unless that is clean, even if you clean every river, the ocean, all the land and the air, it is guaranteed it will all be polluted again. The root cause of the problems of the environment is pollution in the ecology of our minds. Spirituality, yoga, true religion is meant to achieve this purpose. Transformation of consciousness. To transform arrogance into humility. Greed into generosity. Selfishness into a desire to selflessly serve. Within all of us is a living force. The Bhagavad Gita explains, Vidyavanaya sampane brahmani gavihastrini suni chaiva swapake cha pandita samadarshana. True wisdom is not simply an accumulation of data in the brain. True wisdom is the capacity to see every living being with equal vision. Whether one is male or female, black or white or red or yellow or brown, whether one is rich or poor, from the east, from the west, whether one is from one religion or another religion or no religion, whether one is a human or an elephant or a cow or a dog or a cat. Wherever there's life, there is a sacred part of God. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains, Aham bija pradapita. I am the mother and father of all living beings. The conscious living force within us is Satchit Ananda, eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. That's who we are. We're living in this sacred machine of the body and the mind. Seeing through the eyes, hearing through our ears, tasting through our tongue, feeling through our flesh, thinking through our brain, loving through our heart. But who is the witness? Who is the living force within this body? Who is it that makes the difference between a living body and a dead body? When we recognize and understand the living force within ourselves, that is called self-realization. Then we can appreciate and love unconditionally the living force within every living being. Then there is actual, deep, spontaneous respect and honor toward life. And in that is satisfaction, where we don't need to be egoistic and greedy and envious. We don't need to compete on the basis of this ego and greed with each other. Rather, we can have healthy competition that's ultimately meant for everyone's good. Unless human beings learn this art of cleaning the ecology of the heart, that's what meditation, that's what prayer, that's what chanting of mantras is for. Cheto darpanam marjanam bhavamahadavagni nirvapanam. To cleanse the heart of all these anarthas or unwanted dirty things that cause us to pollute others and pollute the world. And allow the true love of the true self, the Atma, the soul, to shine through in whatever we do. Whether we're doctors or lawyers, or farmers or engineers, or politicians or soldiers or housewives or teachers or students, or even swamis. Whatever we do, we're meant to work together for this purpose. When she heard this, the union minister folded her palms and said, "Swamiji, thank you very much. We must all work together." And then everyone around me clapped. And there was still a delay on my flight. India's like that. There's a beautiful verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which Kalyan referred to. Savai pongshang paro dharmo yato bhaktir hokshaje ahoiti apratihata yayatma suprasidati. It explains the supreme dharma. Dharma means the supreme occupation, the supreme religion, the supreme spiritual path. It's not about being a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or a Jain or a Buddhist or a Sikh or a Zoroastrian or a yogi or a yogini. True religion is that which brings us to the state of consciousness where we want to serve God and show compassion to others with unconditional love. Unconditional means not in any way affected or disturbed by selfishness, egoism, or any obstacles or impediments that come before us. To love God is expressed in this world through deep and true compassion to all beings. Wherever we find that quality, that is true religion. Unfortunately, because human beings are so inclined toward identifying with superficial things. What my guru Srila Prabhupada would sometimes say, that human civilization is so much obsessed with unnecessary necessities. We identify with the ritual, we identify with the names, with the colleagues that we are associated with. But what is the essence? What is the purpose? I struggled with this my whole life. In this book, The Journey Home, it is the story of how I dealt with that struggle. I was born in 1950 in Chicago. When I was 4 years old, my parents, they bought a plot of land and a house that they built for $2,000 down. And 30 years to pay $19,000. So they could afford it. It was in a place called Highland Park. And as a small child, some of my friends, their parents hated me and even said that God hated me. And I was totally condemned to hell because I was born in a Jewish family. When I heard this at 7 years old, it deeply hurt me. I couldn't rationalize or intellectually, philosophically sort it out. For adults, the parents of my friends, to think of me this way, simply caused confusion and pain. What is this God that inspires so much hatred? That's what I was thinking. Because everyone was telling me that God is the God of love. But it just didn't seem that way. As I grew older and became a teenager, it was the 1960s. How many of you were around for that era? So you know how confusing and turbulent that time was. The Vietnam War was raging. There was a draft. When you turn 18, if you're called, even if you don't believe in the war at all, you either go to be killed or killed, to kill or be killed, or you go to jail. Those were your two choices. And some of my friends' older brothers, they were sent there against their will and killed, or they came back completely traumatized, psychological wrecks, drug addicts, or wounded for life. In Grant Park, during the Democratic conventions, there were people asking many questions. I went there, and I was tear gassed and chased by club police who were beating brutally. By God's grace, I was a fast runner. And we were told that these were the people protecting our freedom. Didn't make sense. I had a job when I was 15 years old, and everyone, along with my friend Gary and myself, was from the south side of Chicago, African American. They were all my father's age. They were so beaten down by poverty, racial prejudice, and alcoholism to deal with it. I could see that they were prisoners of the ghetto and there was no hope or chance of any of these people getting out. And yet we were pledging allegiance to the flag, that all men are created equal. It didn't make sense. I joined the civil rights movement. And I was cursed at, and stones, bottles, and tomatoes thrown at me when I was marching by my white brothers and sisters. In the counterculture, we grew our hair long, not as a fashion or a style, but as a statement of what we believed, that there has to be a change in this world. It's just not right. And it was passionate. I heard a statement that affected my heart very deeply. If you don't have an ideal, if you do not have an ideal that you are willing to die for, you really have nothing very important to live for. I wanted to find that ideal. But gradually I was seeing in the counterculture, which is infused with rock and roll musics, marijuana, LSD, free sex, demonstrations, anarchy. I saw so many of the same things that we were fighting against that we had. There really wasn't much of a difference. It was just a different fashion, a different cause. I heard the words of Gandhi. Be the change that you want to see in the world. Little by little, I came to the conclusion that if I actually want to be that change, it has to take place in myself on a spiritual level. And seeing so much persecution, hearing of so many dozens of my relatives being murdered by the Nazis in Germany, I really believed that there was an essence that was common in all the great religions of the world. And I felt a desperation to find it. When I was 19, my lifelong friend Gary, he called me up, invited me to Cherry Hill, New Jersey to meet him, and said, Frank and I are leaving for Europe in a few days for a summer vacation. We'll be back in time for college. You must come with us. I said, I have no money and I have a job this summer. I can't leave. He said, Frank is going to pay for both of us because I don't have any money either. I said, oh, if Frank pays, I'll go. So we went. $65, a flight from New York to Iceland. That's Europe, I guess. then we got a connecting flight to Luxembourg. It was a propeller plane. Oh, we were so happy. It was the first time in any of our lives we were ever off the soils of America, in a foreign land. The first day, Frank showed us what kind of accommodations he was going to arrange for us. We stayed in a little tiny one-man tent. All three of us in a campground. For Gary and I, that was fine. We were free in a way. There was a whole ocean between ourselves and our parents. We could do anything we want. The first day, Frank got robbed. And he said, "I'm going home. We can't make it without any money." And he left that same day. And Gary and I said, "Well, we've come this far. It's not about money. We're on a spiritual quest." So we had to really depend on a higher power. And it's a long story, but we decided that we would hitchhike. Do all of you know what hitchhiking is? I don't know if you do it these days, but you stand like this on the side of the road at the mercy of whatever driver comes by. And we decided whoever picks us up, wherever they're going, that is where God wants us to go. So, from Luxembourg, we were in Holland, Abcoude, and then Amsterdam, which was quite a scene in the 1960s. And then we were down to the Hook of Holland, across the English Channel, and then we ended up at the Isle of Wight Rock Festival, the biggest rock festival of the whole generation, with over 500,000 people and all the greatest bands, and they were playing and playing. And I remember Jimi Hendrix was playing his song, and it was blaring out of the speakers, and I was thinking that there's a calling in my heart that's louder than all this music, and it's silent, and it's calling me away from all this. But I didn't know exactly what it was. A few days after that festival, Jimi Hendrix died, just a few blocks from where I was staying, or a mile or so, near London. And I was thinking, he has incredible talent, fame, money, everything everybody could want. But overdosing? Was he satisfied? My hope in the counterculture died along with him. And I started spending almost all my time in cathedrals and monasteries and synagogues and in museums, trying to figure out life, trying to connect to myself. And it's a long story. But eventually Gary and I were living in a cave on a mountain in the Greek island of Crete on the southern coast. Oh, I've lived in a lot of caves since then. I would rate that as a 4-star cave. That was the beginning of my caveman lifestyle. But every day I would go to the top of a mountain and pray and meditate and read spiritual books from sunrise to sunset, and every day Gary would go down to the seashore to do the same. And then we would meet at the cave and discuss our experiences for the day. One day something overcame me. Practically the whole day I was praying for direction. I was weeping for a message. As the sun was setting, the most beautiful sunset I have ever seen. Just indigo, gold, beautiful colors in the clear sky over the Mediterranean Sea. The light of the sun was dancing in such an incredibly beautiful way upon the waves of the sea. And in that moment I heard a voice. It was a silent voice, but it was the most powerful thing that ever happened to me in my life up to that point. Because I knew if I followed what this voice said, I could never turn back and my life would never be the same. It was such a serious crossroads. The voice spoke 3 words. Go to India. I had never met an Indian in my life. I had never eaten Indian food in my life. I had no idea where India was. I didn't have a map and I couldn't afford one. I had nothing. But I was determined to go to India. I went back to the cave. By this time it was dark. There was one little candle, and Gary was sitting in meditation. I said, Gary, something incredible happened to me today. Gary told me something amazing happened to me. I said, what? He said, at sunset I heard a voice. I asked him, what did the voice say? He said, you won't believe me. I said, I really think I will believe you. He said, no, you won't believe me. This is too incredible. I said, well, just tell me. I will believe you. He said, it spoke 3 words. What? We were on the stone floor. I slid closer to him. He said, I heard this voice say, go to Israel. I couldn't believe it. I said, where? He said, I told you wouldn't believe me. I said, no, I believe you. I just didn't hear you properly. Where? He said, Israel. We should go to Israel together. I said, Gary, he told me to go to India. India? There was total silence for 20 minutes. We were both looking out at the stars, dazed and confused about what was going on. And then I turned to Gary and said, at sunrise tomorrow, I'm leaving for India. He said, you can't do that. You have no money. Hitchhiking in Europe is one thing, but hitchhiking through the deserts of the Middle East is dangerous. You're insane. I said, I know. But I'm going. I believe if I just keep hitchhiking in the eastern direction, by God's grace, someday I will arrive in India. And he started to cry, and I started to cry. And at sunrise the next morning, we left each other. And we didn't know if we would ever meet again. Many things happened. Traveling up the coast of Greece, and hitchhiking through Turkey, Istanbul to Ankara to Erzurum, and crossing the border into Iran. Somehow or other, I would meet people who would give me enough money to get a visa for the next country. Going through Iran from Tabriz, Tehran, Mashhad. In Mashhad, I studied Islam under an Islamic scholar. While I was in Italy, I was studying Christianity with Christian monks and priests. And I was going deeper into Judaism as well. And then I entered into Afghanistan. Hitchhiking from Herat to Kandahar to Kabul. That was an extremely life-changing adventure. I'd like to share just one incident among many. In Kandahar, one night, I was sitting with about 5 other really, really poor Afghani people. In those days, every traveler, because there was like a counterculture of world travelers who had no money, and we kind of all knew each other, just meeting each other from place to place. And everyone remarked how friendly and kind the people of Afghanistan was. This is before the Russians invaded and before all the chaos. I learned a lot, an incredible lesson from a mongoose that slept in my long hair as a nest one night. You could read the book if you want to find out about that. But one evening, I was sitting in a little shack, which was a tea stall, with about 5 men just crouched down on the dirt floor, drinking tea. And this boy, about 16 years old, came in. He was holding just a little branch from a tree. On one side was a rusty nail with a tin can on it. And across the tin can was a wire that was nailed onto one side and then nailed on the other side. And it was a musical instrument. He thumped it, going boom, 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 like that. He was emaciated thin, wearing torn, filthy rags. But what really made my heart quake was he is blind. His eyes were swollen, disfigured, and discolored. And I had never seen the uncovered eyes of a blind man. That it just looked so grotesque. He practically had no teeth. As he plunked his instrument, brung, 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 he sang. He sang his love for God, Allah. As he was singing, the smile on his face, the tears coming from those eyes. He had a supernatural joy that lit up the entire little room. And all of us were mesmerized. We couldn't leave as he was singing. I didn't know what he was saying, but I could feel his love for God. And I remember thinking at that time, I have never in my life met anyone that looked so happy as this boy. And this was a serious culture shock for a suburban American boy. Because I was taught my whole life that if you have good health, and you have a good education, and you have wealth and prestige, you'll be happy. This boy had none of that. But he was happier than anyone I ever had seen in my life, because he was tasting the sweetness of devotion to the Lord within his heart. And he was radiating and spreading the sweetness of his joy to anyone who came around him. That was a culture shock. That was very transformative in my journey. Eventually, the Indian border. I had so many diseases on the way. I had so many life-threatening experiences, so many incredible experiences. I really felt that I had aged about 30 years in that 6 months. And here I was, finally, just a few meters away from India. All that was between me was an immigration agent. I had a valid passport with a valid Indian visa. I was covered with dust. I weighed about 110 pounds because I didn't get that much food on this way. But I was so much anticipating. And I gave her my passport, and she looked at me and coldly inquired, "How much money do you have?" I said, "Well, I'll show you everything I have." And I looked through my little cloth bag, because almost everything I had, my sleeping bag was stolen on the way. But I had a little cloth bag with a couple books. I only had the clothes I was wearing. I remember exactly. I had 26 cents in about 5 different currencies. She said, "You need minimum $200 to enter India." I said, "Well, I have a visa." She said, "We have enough beggars. We don't want another one. Go back." I begged her. I pleaded with her. I did everything within human power to convince her, but she got more and more and more angry. She considered me disobedient. And ultimately, she had the guards point their rifles right into my face to tell me, "Go back." This was impossible. Now, please understand the predicament. India and Pakistan had already been through 2 wars. They were vicious enemies. A year from the date I was there, they were going to have another major war. And I was in the no man's land between the two. I only had a one-way visa to Pakistan. I couldn't go back into Pakistan, and I couldn't get into India. And there were no hotels or phone booths in the no man's land. I was trapped. I'd go under this tree and just pray, and then go back to the immigration agent, and she would chase me away. And this went on for 6 hours. See that? Hear that baby crying? That's the way I was. I was crying like that baby, crying to God to help me. We could learn a lot from crying babies. When a baby cries for its mother, it's completely dependent on the mother's kindness. And when we can, in our prayer or in our chanting, when we can cry out for God in that way, then we can actually experience the presence of the Lord. I cried real tears. After 6 hours, as the sun was about to set, the guards changed, and a very tall, strong Sikh agent came, with a turban on. And she pointed to me and told him, "Don't let him in." She drove off, and I went up to the new agent, and before I could even show him my passport, he said, "I have been warned about you. You are a nuisance. You are a parasite. Out from here. Unless you show me $200, you cannot come in." I pleaded, "Just give me a chance. I just want to find the wisdom of your great country. I want to meet the spiritual saints of your country. I promise you, someday I'll do good for your people if you just give me one chance." And I cried. He looked long and hard into my eyes. And then he said, "Sometimes a man must follow his heart. My superior officer has ordered me not to let you in. But I am going to give you the chance that you are crying for." And he stamped my passport. He was about 60 years old. I was 19. And he put his hand on my head and said, "Son, may you find what you are crying for. Welcome to India." So I went to the Himalayas. And there, I remember first seeing the river Ganges. And I went to a very isolated place near Rishikesh and sat in the Ganges and just meditated and prayed for hours and hours. Then I saw one holy man in robes and very long gray hair and a beard. He was walking toward me, looking down into the sand. When he approached me, I stood up to receive him. And he said, "You do not know me, but I know you. I have been observing you. You are sincere. Now take off your Western clothes and offer them into the Ganges, and I will give you the robes of a sadhu." I asked, "What is a sadhu?" He said, "A sadhu is a wandering seeker, one who looks for the divinity, a homeless man wandering the world looking for God." That sounded like what I wanted to do. But I was really attached to my clothes, because they were the only clothes I had. I had no second clothes. I had gray jeans with black pinstripes and a gray turtleneck shirt with black pinstripes. Throw them in the Ganges? And I looked at the clothes he was about to give me. They were just 2 sheets of cotton. I couldn't figure out how I was going to put them on. And I took off my pants. Swept away by the very rapid current. And then he told me I had to offer my underpants. this was becoming a serious test. My underpants, I was convinced there was nothing like this for thousands of miles that I would ever get again. They were fruit of the loom underpants. And he gave me this piece of cloth and wrapped it around me and said, now take off your underpants. Gone. And then I wrapped one piece of cloth around my waist, and then I wrapped another piece around my upper body. And then he gave me these 2 strands of cloth to make underpants. They were a loincloth, or kopan it's called in Hindi. Then he looked at me and said, the Ganges will become your mother. She will reveal this in time. And then he walked away. And to this day, I've never seen him again. But I decided to sit on a rock in the middle of the Ganges River and meditate and pray from sunrise to sunset every day. Then after that, I found a cave in the forest of the Himalayas. It was a 2-star cave, very simple, where I dwelled in. And as I was sitting on this rock, the most extraordinary lessons were revealed to me, which are hard to describe with the short amount of time we have tonight. But I remember watching the Ganges. She was so beautiful. Crystal clear, deep aqua blue, flowing with such fast current. And the swirls and the ripples of her waves were so beautiful. I was thinking, no human artist could possibly capture the true beauty of what I'm seeing. But the nature of the beauty, as soon as it is created, it disappears. It's always changing. And what lesson I learned from this? It's just like life. Everything that's beautiful or everything that's not beautiful, whatever we see, everything is constantly changing. But there's a current of truth that is constant. And if our happiness is based on these ever-changing manifestations, our happiness is short-lived. But actually, if we tune in and find happiness in that current of truth, which is underlying life, then whatever may happen on the surface, we'll always be happy. And one day I was thinking how Mother Ganges was flowing down from the high peaks of the Himalayas all the way to the sea in the Bay of Bengal, over 1,000-mile journey. And on her way, there were so many obstacles. There were huge rocks that have fallen into her, massive trees, mountains, but somehow or other, Mother Ganges would either go over, around, or under all obstacles that were on her path. And similarly, if we want to reach the sea of our true aspiration in life, we can never be discouraged. We should never give up. We always have to have hope and somehow or other move over, under, around any obstacle that may come. And nothing is impossible with the grace of God. In the journey home, I tell many such lessons I learned from the Ganges. And I realized she was my mother. Every day, I would just drink her water, and she nourished me. And she nourished me with such incredible wisdom. More wisdom than I ever learned in my schools. Changed my life. And the beautiful sound of the song of the Ganges transformed me. Every day I would go in after the sunset, on my way to the cave, one man who was selling vegetables would give me a carrot. So a carrot and Ganges water was my diet for that month. I was so happy. But after the month ended, at least I thought it was a month because I didn't have a calendar, I decided to break my fast. Would you like to hear this story? It's a story I'll never forget. One day when I was roaming around the town of just above Rishikesh, I saw a peanut seller. And all my life I loved peanuts. And this man was roasting them fresh in sand on a wok with a blazing fire under it. And I had 1 rupee that someone gave me, which in those days was equal to 7 cents. And I was thinking I would get a little bag of peanuts for 7 cents to break my fast after a month of eating a little carrot. So I gave him a rupee, and he started patching together newspapers, and he made a grocery bag this big and filled it to the top with freshly roasted in the shell peanuts. I was so happy. But it's the custom of sadhus, you don't eat in public. So I was taking this bag of peanuts back to the cave. While I was in the jungle on the way, there was a big, brown, male monkey that jumped right in the path in front of me. And he looked mean. He showed his fangs, his green eyes glowered at me, and he went, he was another kind of immigration agent. I always had trouble with immigration agents everywhere I went. He leapt right at me, screaming, showing his teeth, and he jumped and kicked me with his hind legs really forcefully, and his face was inches against mine, and he went, and then he grabbed the bag of peanuts and ran away. Some of the peanuts fell, and I was just about to pick them up, and 3 little baby monkeys grabbed those little peanuts and ran away. I was not left with a single nut. I was thinking how unfortunate I was. Because I had such expectations, such anticipation, and such hunger. My stomach was churning for those peanuts. But then I was thinking, what am I supposed to learn? That's the most important thing in life. Whatever happens, what wisdom we get from it, how we grow. How compared to the experiences I had of spiritual feelings, all the things of this world are like peanuts. And how people, they lie, they cry, they die for some of these peanuts. But they do not know that at any moment, the monkey of somebody else's greed, or the monkey of death is going to steal away all our peanuts. What really is important in life? Do you know something? This happened 41 years ago, and I still consider that male monkey one of my gurus in life for teaching me what really I should believe is of true value. Anyways, I went to live with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and then I went to live with Swami Chidananda, and I lived with Swami Rama and J. Krishnamurti and Swami Satchidananda and so many, Anandamayi Ma. I lived with many saints in India, and they treated me just like their own child. I lived in a cave with one yogi named Tatwala Baba, who I was told was the greatest yogi in all the Himalayas. And he sat in meditation for sometimes 10 to 12 hours a day without moving, without even going to the bathroom. And I sat next to him, but I was moving sometimes. But just sitting near him in a cave was quite an experience. And after I left him, I went higher into the Himalayas, and I'm going to tell just a couple stories because I think I should end soon. Do you mind if I tell a couple more stories? I went a little higher into the mountains. I was all alone. I came to a clearing in the forest, and what I saw horrified me. There were people, some in rags, some naked, emaciated, in total poverty, just living on the ground. Some of them, they dug holes in the ground and buried themselves with dirt against the cold of the Himalayan nights. But what struck me most is many of them had no fingers. They had deformed faces with their noses melted away. I had entered a leprosy colony. And suddenly, about 20 of those lepers surrounded me tightly so I could not move and put their bloody stubbed fingers in my face and screamed out, "Bakshish! Bakshish!" which means give me charity. I didn't have anything, not even the peanuts. But I didn't speak their language and they didn't speak my language, and they couldn't believe that a white person didn't have anything. They wouldn't let me go. The breathing of their breath, the smell of their decaying flesh. I was nauseous. I was sick, and they were putting their bloody fingers in my face. And I remember thinking, leprosy's contagious. And it's all over me. Am I going to be left to die with them? I was confused. And finally they patted me down completely and saw that I had nothing and let me go. I took a few steps and looked to my left side and stopped in my tracks. I happened to see an old leper woman laying on her side. Hardly any hair on her head. No teeth, no nose, no fingers, no toes. Her face was totally deformed. But she looked at me. She looked at me with the compassion of a mother. through her glance, she was feeling the pain that her people caused me. And through her glance, she was begging forgiveness on behalf of her people. In her eyes, I felt the love of a mother. I felt here was someone. All she wanted in her life was to give the love of a mother from her heart. Someone she wanted to accept it. It may have been 20 or 30 years that nobody had accepted that from her. It's as if she was begging me to just accept the love she wanted to give somebody. Then she put out her fingerless hand to bless me. And I ran over to her, got on my knees and put my head under her hand. And I heard her say in the Hindi language again and again, "May God bless you, my child. May God bless you. May God bless you." And I looked up and I saw ecstasy on her face. The joy of giving. Now you may not understand this, and even I couldn't understand it. But I could tell you, as I was looking in her face, seeing the joy of her motherly affection, I was thinking, she is the most beautiful person I've ever met in my life. After I left her, we were both crying. I went to the river and contemplated. What is real beauty? Real beauty is the love of the heart. Real beauty is not simply the external features that are ever changing in a person. And if only we can connect to that beauty within ourselves and connect with that beauty within others, then there is real relationships, deep relationships, spiritual relationships. I went further and met one sadhu named Kailash Baba. He was a huge man, probably about 6'5". He was a mountain of a sadhu. He was in his late 60s, I think. People told me he was hundreds of years old, but he looked like he was in his late 60s. He was living in the jungles since he was 12 years old. And he took me in like a father to a son. And he taught me how to live in the jungle, what leaves and herbs and fruits you can eat. If you get sick, what medicine you can take, just in the forest. How to beg with integrity. How to honor and respect the sun, the moon, all kinds of other people. How to love and respect our neighbors in the forest, which were leopards, wild boar, wild elephants, panthers, scorpions, cobras, and lots of mosquitoes. He was telling me these wild animals like the leopards and the cobras, if you fear them, they will attack you and you will die because they're all over the place. But if you love them and respect them, the soul within them, and you give them their space, then they will give you your space and you will live as neighbors. He said, I've been doing it for 50 years. This was a crash course. Because as he was telling me, there were snakes and there were cobras and there were leopards. I learned so much from him. The interesting thing, he didn't speak a word of English and I didn't speak a word of Hindi. But he taught me through his gestures, through his glances. And I realized then that real teaching is heart to heart. If a teacher genuinely, deeply cares to benefit the student, then that can cross beyond all barriers, even language barrier. The communication is of the heart, because there was concern. I was eager to learn, and he deeply cared about me. Eventually, after traveling the Himalayas, I came down to the plains, and I went to Bodh Gaya, the place where Buddha reached enlightenment, and meditated under the tree that Buddha sat under, and learned from Zen Buddhist masters and Tibetan Buddhist masters and Zen and Burmese Buddhist masters. And then I went to Calcutta, where I stayed with Mother Teresa for some time. And then I traveled across for a meditation course in Mumbai. In those days, it was called Bombay. And I was meditating about 12 hours a day in this little hut with a Buddhist meditation teacher. And one day I just decided to walk. So I just walked and walked and walked. I was barefoot, wearing the same old robes that sadhu gave me a year before. And I was walking and walking and walking. It was very crowded streets, very busy. And I came to a stoplight, and I saw a giant sign that said, it was advertising a spiritual festival. So I went. And it's a long story, but I'm just going to come to the end of it. I met some of the people there, and they were very friendly and very nice, and they said their guru was speaking in the evening. So there was a giant tent in a park in downtown Mumbai called Cross Maidan. And about 20,000 people gathered in this tent. And I was really shy in those days. I still am, but I kind of pretend I'm not sometimes. And I was in the very back of 20 to 30,000 people. Some people say there were 30,000, some say there were 20,000, and I just know it was a massive crowd. And everyone was sitting on the ground, and then there was a stage, and there was chanting, and then the guru came on the stage. He just illuminated all directions with humility and with wisdom. There was just so much grace in him. He greeted the whole crowd, and there was chanting going on. And he called over one of his assistants and said something in his ear. Then that assistant went to the edge of the stage and started signaling for somebody to come. He was going like this, but nobody came. Then he came down and went into the crowd all the way to the back. He walked right up to little me. We were just minding my own business in the back corner. And he took me by the hand and said, Srila Prabhupada wants you to sit with him. I said, how does he know me? And he didn't give me any answer. He just pulled me. And as you could see from whatever I've said so far, I was quite pullable in those days. So he just pulled me through all these thousands and thousands and thousands of people and brought me right up to the stage. And brought me right up to the Guru, Srila Prabhupada, who so warmly and compassionately welcomed me and invited me to sit not far from him. And that was the first meeting with my beloved spiritual master. I stayed with him for about 14 days, but I didn't accept him as my guru. My heart was saying, this is your guru. But my mind and intelligence were saying, no, you have to go and see more. So I took leave of him, and he blessed me in such a special way. And I went down to Ganesh Puri, where I live with Swami Muktananda. And then I went up to Dharamshala, where I lived with the Dalai Lama. And I went so many other places. And I'm going to tell you one more story. Do I have time, or is it ended? It's ended, so I'm not going to tell you. But one more? Okay. I was in Nepal, and I was in a rice paddy. And it was so expansive. There was no houses, no trees. It was just a rice paddy. And you know how rice paddies are? It was during the monsoon rain season, so the paddies are thick, slushy mud where the rice grows. And then there's little borders about a foot wide you could walk on. And I saw, as I was walking in the Kathmandu Valley near Swayambhunath, massive rain clouds forming in the sky. And I was going to look for shelter because I only had one set of clothes. But there was nothing. And there was absolutely no one, as far as the eyes could see, except one little old man who had an umbrella. About 100 yards ahead of me. So I ran, careful not to fall in the rice paddy according to the little border, and I ran up to him, and we stood under the same umbrella, and he was walking, and I was walking right behind him. And I was not getting very wet either. I was right behind him, and he never turned around to see who I was, because I guess he might slip. It was a massive storm. About 20 minutes later, the rain subsided, and I said, "Thank you." And he turned around, and we both gasped, and he dropped his umbrella in the mud. It was Gary. We had no communication for about a year. And we were the only two people in that entire rice paddy walking under the same umbrella. And we didn't even know it. Anyways, we embraced. And he told me he did go to Israel. And he worked on a kibbutz for a year. And then he took a bus. It was called the Magic Bus. It went from Amsterdam to Delhi. And he took the Magic Bus. But I couldn't afford any Magic Buses. Eventually I came to the beautiful, beautiful town of Vrindavan, the land of Bhakti. Bhakti is the yoga of the heart, the yoga of love. Bhakti is the path which in my study I found to be the very foundational essence of all great religions. Bhakti is devotion. Lord Chaitanya and my guru, who I met in Vrindavan later, taught me that Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sajja Kabunoi Sravanadi Sudhi Cheti Kori Yudoi. That prema, love of God, is within the heart of everyone. It is our true nature. It is our essence. It is our highest potential. And it is forever. It simply has to be awakened. Bhakti is the process of cleaning ourselves of all the things that block that love within our heart and awakening that love. And this kirtan, or the chanting of the holy names, these are divine sound vibrations. God is not different than the name of God. And these vibrations, these mantras, awaken the love that is within us. And when there is love of God awakened within our heart, it manifests as compassion to all beings. There's no greater joy, there's no greater fulfillment than connecting with that love. The most fundamental need of every living being is to love and to be loved. Why? Because that is our inherent nature. To love God, the all-attractive, all-beautiful, and to feel the infinite love of God, and to be an instrument of that love in whatever we do. Whether we're engineers, business people, whether we're farmers, or doctors, or lawyers, or politicians, students, teachers, housewives, or swamis, whatever we may be, we can express our love for God and compassion for all if we connect to that essence within us. Bhakti is the path of tuning in to the grace that is within us all and pervading the entire universe. But somehow or other our consciousness is tuned into so many other things. But when we tune in, we find something so beautiful. In the land of Vrindavan, I discovered, or let us say, it was revealed to me what I was yearning for, what I was crying for, what I was longing for in the yoga of love. I thank you very, very much.